I'm getting ready to do a join in a lace edging, and I've been working the eyebrow edging from the Poinsettia shawl, and I've begun with 4 or 5 rows of waste yarn. And row 1 of the pattern begins with a yarn over and is worked in pattern into the last row of the waste yarn. So you can see where I've done a knit 2 together, 2 stitches have clustered side by side. So I've continued working my repeats until I've finished 1 row short of completion. So this is a 22 row repeat. I've finished at the end of row 21. I've cut off the yarn with 5 times the width of the knitting, which should give me plenty of yarn with which to sew in the last missing row. The next step to preparing the waste yarn at the far end is to work the missing row in waste yarn. As this row begins with the yarn over, I'm just going to tie my waste yarn around the old working yarn and snuggle that up to the edge. Now I'm going to work row 22, which begins with a yarn over, knit 2 together, knit 9, and now it's a yarn over, knit 2 together, knit 1, and that is row 22 in pattern. And what row 22 does is it pushes around the stitches of row 21, and that's what we're going to copy and connect to the first row of the pattern. Now I can finish this waste yarn in a simple stocking stitch, so I'm just going to work alternating knit rows and purl rows until it's about 4 or 5 rows long. And in a lace shawl you would be working this using the same weight of yarn as you have used for the edging. So don't use a fat yarn, use exactly the same weight of yarn for your waste yarn, but brightly different in colour. Then we'll be ready to make the join. I don't have a very long piece of waste yarn here. I could always tie on some more, but I'm also going to make a quick economy here by decreasing a couple of stitches, because once you're away from the patterned edge, it's not compulsory that you have exactly the same number of stitches. As long as it doesn't cause this edge to gather up or pucker, I can get rid of a few stitches, speed things up a bit. And that's going to be long enough. I'm just going to put these stitches onto the tail of this piece of yarn. Now that I've completed my final waste yarn, I've got my needle threaded on to my working yarn, and because we're on the wrong side row, I'm turning it over and I'm folding the beginning back to the end. And the first thing that my yarn did was go into a yarn over. So I'm going to take that up here and follow this first stitch on this side. So I'm following that pink waste yarn stitch. When the yarn came back down on this side, it came into these 2 stitches. So I followed that pink stitch and up and over, forming a purl bump. I'm gathering that to about the right size and shape, so I need to bring So I've copied this pink purl bump and mimicked it, and I've adjusted the size of those stitches so they're not too big. And now I've got to copy the second stitch. So that was the first one we copied, and this second one goes in here and behind there and out into that yarn over. Back over to this side from the same loop I came out from, and back in this direction. Now I've copied this pink stitch, so my next one to copy is that one. Back to the purl bump and down, and I can actually do that all in one movement because it's garter stitch that I'm grafting here, so it's making purl bumps on this side. And I've got to pay attention here, I've got two pink stitches, one on top of the other because it was a decrease. So there's the first one. And now I've got to do that again because the second one is underneath. So I'm going to go underneath that first sewn stitch and across the top again. That way my decrease will be exactly the same as it would be in the rest of the knitting. And back into this hole. Let's see where we go next. So it seems a bit weird, but those are the two pink stitches that we've copied here with their matching pink stitches. Now there's a bit of a gap because there's been a yarn over there. But you just have to have faith in the waste yarn. So I'll complete that purl bump. Now the next pink stitch holds those two. This is definitely something I'd suggest you practice. Make a little swatch just like this and practice it before you commit to this. Copy that pink purl bump. Back on this side, the next pink stitch does that. Completing a nice yarn over hole there. And this is another decrease. So I've got to go in here twice. So first the top layer and along to the next one. And then back underneath and do the same thing again. Trying to keep this second one underneath the first one. No one would really notice. And then the next pink stitch is this one. So there's two pink stitches, two green stitches. Back to this side and copy this one. And this is the point at which it gets a bit nail biting to see if you've really got it right. So I'm going to come up and copy this stitch. And at this moment, it looks like I'm going to run out of stitches. I've got to be brave. The next pink stitch on this side, all it does is goes around that one piece of yarn. Now you've got two pink stitches in this next section. And the first one, the second stitch in from the edge is underneath, so we'll go in and round. Now we come back to this side and the next pink stitch does this. And now we've got to go back over here, in and round. the next pink stitch comes from here to here. And at this point you might be thinking that you have run out of stitches to work, but in fact this is a sort of wandering yarn over. So if we go back in to that stitch, around the yarn over and back into that side, everything should be correct. And if you're not happy with it, you can go back and have another go. And now we'll take out the waste yarns. I always take out the last waste yarn first, because if things dropped apart, you can easily replace this one. See how that's looking. Nothing's falling apart. The lace pattern seems fine. Now I've got to remove the first waste yarn. That's going to take a little time because I've got decreases in there, so I'm going to have to pick that out stitch by stitch. I cut mid-row so that I can work my stitches out in both directions. There we go. Let's have a look at our lace. So that's where we joined, and we've got our 3-hole cluster, which is how it should look. And once we've adjusted the tension on the edge, you would never know that there was a join in that lace.